Let us begin with a word of prayer together. Gracious One, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. There's a particular author that I have collected several books of hers. She's a preacher, retired preacher, Barbara Brown Taylor, and she's written several books of collected sermons. And there's one particular sermon that caught my attention that was particularly related to the Advent season, and the title of the sermon was A Daring Plan. And you open up that particular sermon, begin to read, and you hear a little bit of this from Barbara Brown Taylor's readings. Imagine, if you will, a time before time. A time before time was even a thing, before there were clocks and calendars and way to compute things. It was just God and nothing else. And at some point, God decided, I need to create something. And God began creating and forming all the things that we see. Began seeing light from dark, sun and moon and stars in the sky. Began shaping planets. Began filling the planets with all kinds of greenery and life. You see it in the expanse of the trees, the beauty of the flowers, all the smells that all of creation offers us to experience. And you get to see all the beautiful animals that were created in that grand scheme within the concepts that's beyond our concept of God's mind. There were elephants with these long noses and little ants that crawled along the ground, and birds of multitude of colors that filled and flew across the planet. And there was a lot that God was pleased about with that creation, but felt as though something was missing from this grand scheme of creation, and decided to form human beings. And in the midst of forming human beings, gave human beings the capacity to think critically, to think for themselves. And God gave human beings the gift of freedom, of free will. And at the beginning, it was a great thing. And God and humanity were doing a great job with one another, loving each other and admiring and celebrating that relationship. But as time went on, God realized with this gift of freedom came the choice to not follow, to do things of their own volition. To say to themselves, well, I did this, I accomplished this, I did all these wonderful things, forgetting the relationship that was there about mutuality and collaboration and all things that happened. And so God occasionally would send another person to them that we'd call a prophet. And usually the prophet, when the prophet would show up, means we're not doing so well. The prophet was there to remind them of the covenant that was there between God and all of creation and humanity. And it didn't seem to work, these prophets. It maybe worked for a little while, but human beings kind of went back to the way they did things. Until God came up with another idea, a daring plan. Maybe the one thing that I could do that might change their minds about how we live in peace with one another is the gift of a child. Now, I'm guessing the angels were saying to God at this point, if you're going to send a child, at least send the child with superpowers. Maybe can throw lightning bolts, and maybe can fly, and maybe this baby can do all kinds of things. It would impress the world if you had this baby with superpowers. But that's not what God did. God said, those are nice ideas, but that's not going to do the trick. I'm going to send a child just like them. Have you ever just held a small little child in your arms, seeing their tiny little fingers and toes, and their whole life is dependent upon someone else to take care of them? Very different than the animal kingdom in terms of when animals are born, they almost can take care of themselves from the beginning. But human life requires others to take care of this shared relationship with one another. God's daring plan was for a child to come in the world so that people's eyes and ears and hearts might open enough to think the world could be different than the way it currently is. Now it comes down to Luke chapter 1, and we have the story where an angel appears to Mary. Now when a prophet appears, you're not doing so well. When an angel appears, it means something good might happen, or some amazing thing's about to happen. I'm not sure what it's going to be, but if an angel shows up, I need to stand up and listen to this. And the angel goes on to tell Mary that she will have a child, and this child will not be that ordinary child. It will be this unique child that's coming into the world. Now, I can just try to imagine, and I can't, I'm not a female, just try to imagine what would have been going on in Mary's mind at that point. What are you talking about? Me? Of all the people in the world, you're coming to me to tell me this news? How is this even possible that this could happen? I mean, all those kind of wonderings and questionings of things were going on in her mind. She's thinking, I'm a woman in first century world. What significance do I have? I'm hardly considered a person of importance in my own household, let alone the community and society in which I live. Where will my importance be when the rest of society doesn't even look at me as someone that's important? I'm guessing all that stuff was probably running through her mind as this angel told her the news of the gift of this child that was to come. And yet we hear at the end of the story, she finally says, I'm your servant, let it be so, and carries out the very plan that was told to her. And that's not an easy journey to make that kind of decision. May had limited time to make that choice. Psychology today tells us that 85% of not only the U.S. population, but the world population deals with low self-esteem. 85% of the human population deals with low self-esteem. That's a large population of people trying to figure out themselves, let alone themselves in relationship to other people and how they think about themselves. My guess is Mary was not alone in her own ponderings of, can I do this? Is this possible? Should it be me? Should it be someone else? And we go through all those inner stirrings in our mind of trying to discern out what I can or can't do in the world. This message to Mary was an invitation for her to grow in who she was as a person. It made me think of a poem, and I pulled up this poem by Howard Thurman called The Growing Edge. All around us, worlds are dying and new worlds are being born. All around us, life is dying and life is being born. The fruit ripens on the tree. The roots are silently at work in the darkness of the earth, against a time when there shall be new leaves, fresh blossoms, green fruit. Such is the growing edge. Is the extra breath from the exhausted lung, the one more thing to try when all else has failed, the upward reach of life when weariness closes in upon all endeavor. This is the basis of hope in moments of despair, the incentive to carry on when times are out of joint. And men and women have lost their reason, the source of confidence when worlds crash and dreams whiten into ash. The birth of a child, life's most dramatic answer to death. This is the growing edge incarnate. Look well to the growing edge. Mary was invited to dream a little bit. Not just go through the assessment of the news that came in. Can I do this? Can I not do this? Do I have the capabilities of that or not have the capabilities for that? Simply lean into the growing edge of the possibility of what birth can mean to you and your life and those around you. So much has to do with our perspective and our attitude about things. I've mentioned before that I was kind of ingrained as a small child to think positively about everything. One of the authors my dad just made me read over and over again was Norman Vincent Peale, who was a kind of a positive thinker. And one of the quotes of Norman Vincent Peale is, If you think the world needs to be different, you have to start by making a difference within yourself, is one of the quotes he often shared. We can do a lot of complaining about the world, and we can look at the landscape, and it can be a depressing landscape of the things we see on the horizon that might be happening. Individuals and groups that feel fearful about their life experience and what's coming down. There might be fear in the LGBTQ community, immigrants and refugees and women's and human rights of various kinds, feeling like, where is all this going to land? We want the world to be different than the way we experience it. We want people to thrive and have life and purpose in how they live their life in community with one another. We want places like this. And we can either point our finger at blaming other people, or we can be a part of the very change we want to see happen. We can wait for life just to come at us and receive with whatever comes, or we can be a part of the solutions of things that evolve, that stand up for people when they need to be stood up for, to walk beside people when they need a partner, to accompany people through the hardest challenges of life. Mary was asked to consider doing something pretty significant, pretty big. And she had to lean into something that she hadn't leaned into, like she had never leaned in her life before. But she had to do that. It's a challenging thing, I think, to make big decisions of what I'm going to do when a big decision comes upon my life. The biggest thing we have to do is make room for newness in our life. Oftentimes we think about our calendars of the things that are going on in our life is full. People that are working and have kids, they can barely fit everything in to the weekly life. And those that are retired wondered how they work because they're so busy. I mean, all these things we seem to fill our lives with all this stuff. It's like we've gathered and gathered and gathered, and our hands are just full of all this stuff. I got nothing left that can fit in my hands. I've just got so much going on in my life, in my mind, in my heart. I feel like it's just full of all this stuff, and there's no more room for anything. And Mary may have felt like that. And this angel shows up and says, I've got something new for you. It's something big. And Mary's thinking, how am I going to fit that into my life? And Mary realizes that in order for her to make room for this new news, she had to release something. You have to release some things for new things to come in. And sometimes our releasing is the releasing of hate. It's the release of fear. It's the release of the ambiguity of the unknown. And sometimes we leave room and make room for the gift of Christ in our life. We make room for wonder. We make room for mystery. We make room for curiosity. We make room for the things that bring us life and help us thrive and be the very person that God created us to be before there was even time in the beginning. Before we even thought. The capability of us has always been there. Making room is hard because it means letting something go. But today we're invited to make some room, to release some things for the things that God has in store, these promises that are waiting for us. Sometimes we release the busyness and make room for the stillness. Sometimes we release the injustice so that justice can be found. Sometimes we have to release our own selfishness so that unselfishness and humility can find a way through. God had this daring plan in the grandiose nature of God's own mind, as big as that was, and said, I think the way to connect with human beings is with a small infant baby child. And if they see that child, maybe they will make enough room for the world that I've always imagined them to live in. Can we make room for that? We'll see.